My name is Adrian Cross. I'm 29 years old, and 11 days ago, the man who built our company with me looked me in the eye and told me I was done. He said it at 7:59 a.m., standing in the doorway of my own office, holding a coffee he didn't offer me. This isn't personal, Adrian. The board wants a fresh direction. I smiled. I nodded. I said, understood. Then I walked to my car, opened my laptop on the passenger seat, and sent one email, 2 lines, to an address I hadn't used in 4 years. By 9 a.m., his phone was ringing. By 9:15, our lawyers were on a call he didn't schedule. By noon, the company he thought he controlled wasn't his to control anymore. He didn't know that clause existed. I did. I'd known for 4 years. I'd been waiting for him to be stupid enough to use it against me. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 7 years ago, to a folding table in a garage that smelled like solder and burnt coffee, when a woman named Ruth Bellamy said something to me that I didn't understand until the morning I got fired. The garage belonged to Ruth's late husband. She never fixed the hinge on the side door, so it groaned every time someone came in, like the building was clearing its throat. I was 22. I'd answered a listing for junior developer, equity only, must be hungry. I was hungry. Ruth was 61 then. She didn't code. She'd run 3 companies before this one and buried 2 husbands. And she talked like every sentence cost her something, so she made them count. The garage smelled like machine oil, and the lavender hand cream she kept by the sink. In winter, the space heater ticked against the concrete floor, a small metal sound. On off, all night while we worked. There was a mug on the folding table that said, "World's okayest boss." Ruth's granddaughter had given it to her. Ruth never washed it properly, just rinsed it and let it dry upside down on a paper towel. And somehow that little ritual made the garage feel like somewhere instead of nowhere. The other co-founder was Marcus Voss. He was older, smoother, the kind of person who shook your hand a half-second too long so you'd remember it. Ruth put him in charge of the business side, because she was tired, and I was 22, and neither of us wanted to negotiate rent. I didn't see it yet, how Marcus talked about the company like a thing he owned, rather than a thing we'd built. Small stuff. He'd say, my company to investors, and our company to Ruth. He'd take credit for my code in meetings I wasn't invited to. Nothing you could point to. Just weather. One night, close to midnight, Ruth handed me a mug of tea I hadn't asked for, and sat down across the folding table. Her hands were cold. She held the mug like it was the only warm thing in the room. Adrian, she said, people will always tell you what they're building. Watch what they're protecting instead. That's the truth of them. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. I thought she meant something about honesty. I filed it away the way you file away things old people say, fondly and without weight. Marcus started using a different word for things. Layoffs became restructuring. Ruth's slowing hours became reduced bandwidth. I noticed it because Ruth noticed it first. I'd catch her go quiet whenever he said it, like she was hearing something under the words. She never argued with him in front of me. She just started writing things down in a leather notebook she kept in her coat pocket, and she stopped bringing the mug to the office. I didn't know what was wrong. I only knew that something in the garage had gotten colder, and it wasn't the space heater. Ruth got sick in our 3rd year, right after we moved out of the garage and into an actual office with a glass door that didn't groan. It started as tiredness. Then it was hospital visits she didn't mention until after they happened. By the time she told the 2 of us together, sitting very straight in her chair the way she always did, it was already stage 4. Marcus's face did something I'll never forget. Not grief, calculation. It lasted less than a second, and I only caught it because I happened to be looking right at him. 2 days later, I overheard him on the phone in the stairwell, thinking no one was the sometimes, "No, it's fine, it's actually good timing," he was saying. Once she's out of the picture, there's no one to slow down the round. I can restructure the cap table the way I wanted from the start. I stood on the landing with my hand on the railing and didn't move. I didn't cough. I didn't confront him. I just listened until he hung up, and then I went back to my desk and opened my laptop and did nothing at all, which is its own kind of doing something. Ruth died 4 months later, in the spring, on a Tuesday. Marcus cried at the funeral. I watched him do it and thought about the stairwell. Within a week, restructuring was the word for everything. My equity vesting schedule got restructured. 2 engineers who'd been loyal to Ruth got restructured out entirely. Marcus started calling the company, my company, to my face now, no longer bothering with our. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I was invisible to him by then. He'd stopped seeing me as a co-founder and started seeing me as overhead, a name on the cap table he hadn't figured out how to remove yet. I let him believe that. I kept my head down, kept writing code, kept saying understood to things I didn't accept. I decided, quietly, that if he thought I was nothing, I would use being nothing as the only weapon I had. 6 weeks after the funeral, Ruth's estate lawyer called me. His name was Arthur Kessler, and Ruth had apparently instructed him, over a year before she got sick, to reach out to me specifically if certain conditions were ever met. Ruth left you something, he said. Not money, a document. She was very particular that you not open it until Marcus made his move. She said you'd know what that meant when it happened. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. He mailed me a sealed envelope, and inside it was a single page in Ruth's handwriting, along with a copy of an amendment to our founding agreement. One she'd had drawn up quietly, 3 years earlier, back when the company was still just a garage and a groaning door. It was called, informally, the Founder's Clause. Buried in careful legal language, it said this: if either founder was removed from operational control without cause, and without a unanimous board vote, meaning without Ruth's vote, which she'd left permanently assigned, even posthumously, to a trust Kessler controlled on my behalf, then all voting shares reverted automatically to the remaining original founder. Ruth had built a trap and never sprung it. She'd protected me before she even knew what she was protecting me from. She told me, Kessler said, that Marcus would eventually try to push you out, once he thought there was no one left to answer to. She said you'd earned the right to see it coming and stop it cold, but only once he'd actually done it, not before. She wanted him to hang himself with his own signature. I read the clause 4 times that night, at my kitchen table, with the lamp on and the rest of the apartment dark. I thought about the stairwell. I thought about the mug drying upside down on a paper towel. I thought about a word Ruth used once, protecting, and finally understood what she'd meant that night in the garage. People will always tell you what they're building. Watch what they're protecting instead. 2 nights later, working late, I heard Marcus on a call in his office. Door not quite closed, the way careless people leave doors. He was talking to an investor about cleaning up the founder situation, before the next round closed. He named a date. He named a number. He said, once Adrian's out, this is a much cleaner story to tell. I went home and texted Kessler 2 words. He's moving. He texted back, then so are we. Marcus went to sleep that night thinking he had a plan. He had a countdown. Kessler walked me through it, in plain terms, the way Ruth would have wanted. The clause would only activate the moment Marcus formally removed me. A termination. A resignation forced under pressure. Anything on paper. The instant that happened, ownership reverted, and I would need to sign a single acceptance document within 1 business day to lock it in permanently. Everything was already drafted. Everything was already filed with the state. All I had to do was wait for him to pull the trigger, and be ready to move within hours, not days. Marcus tried kindness first, in his own cold currency of it. He took me to lunch and talked about protecting my legacy, if I stepped back gracefully, offered me an advisor title, and a small buyout, framed it like a gift. I looked at him across the table and said, I'll think about it. I never told him what I was actually thinking about. My younger sister, Mia, noticed something was wrong before I said a word. She caught me staring at nothing over dinner, and asked, quietly, if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me, and she didn't push, and that not pushing was its own kind of love I didn't deserve yet. The night before it happened, I drove out to the old garage. The new owners had repainted it, but the side door still groaned the same way. I stood there a long time in the cold, and I almost called Marcus right then. Almost told him I knew everything. Almost let 4 years of silence break open in one furious phone call. I didn't. I remembered Ruth, straight-backed in her chair, saying, watch what they're protecting. I understood, finally, that she hadn't just meant Marcus. She'd meant me, too. I was protecting something now. Her work, her trust, the company that still, somehow, carried her name in its bones. I cried standing outside that garage. Not from weakness, from clarity. I wish this were different. I wish Marcus had been the kind of partner who would have grieved with me instead of calculated around me. I wish he had wanted to build something instead of own something. But wishes don't hold up. The Founder's Clause does. It happened on a Thursday. I sat in my apartment that night, laptop open, the only light in the room. Kessler called at 11:50 p.m. to walk through the final document one more time. Calm as always. Like we were confirming a dinner reservation instead of a company. Once this is signed, he said, it's done. No undoing it. Are you certain? I've been certain for 4 years, I said. I signed at 12:03 a.m., Kessler said. Ruth would be proud of how long you waited. Then, gentler. Get some sleep, Adrian. I looked at the timestamp on the screen. 12:03 a.m. I am 29. I am again the majority owner of the company Ruth Bellamy and I built in a garage with a groaning door. Across town, Marcus was almost certainly already asleep, confident in a termination letter his lawyer had drafted that afternoon. Confident that tomorrow morning he'd hand me a coffee he had no intention of sharing and walk me out the door of my own company. He had no idea the door had already closed behind him instead. He'd find that out in about 8 hours. He fired me at 7:59 a.m., standing in my office doorway, holding that coffee. This isn't personal, Adrian. The board wants a fresh direction. I smiled. I nodded. I said, understood. I walked to my car and sent Kessler the confirmation. By 9 a.m., the reversion was filed and active. By 9:15, Kessler's office called the board directly. By 9:30, Marcus's assistant was standing in his doorway telling him the board wanted an emergency call. The same doorway, the same posture he'd used on me 20 minutes earlier. Except now he was the one being told something he didn't understand yet. I came back to the office at 11. Marcus was standing by his desk, phone in hand, staring at an email from Kessler's firm. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was still the person he'd fired an hour before. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 4 years. This isn't real, he said. Ruth filed it 3 years ago, I said. You just signed the paperwork that activated it. He didn't shout. He didn't explain himself. He just sat down, slowly, in the chair that used to be his, and said nothing at all. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just picked up the mug on his desk, an ordinary mug, not Ruth's, and set it down on a coaster, gently, and walked out to let the board finish the call without me in the room. Ruth used to say, people will always tell you what they're building. Watch what they're protecting instead. I always thought she meant something about telling honesty from dishonesty. She meant something bigger. She meant that the truest thing about a person is what they quietly guard when they think no one's watching. And the truest thing about her was that she'd spent her last working years quietly guarding me. Marcus resigned from the board 2 weeks later. With a severance he negotiated himself, ironically using the very language he used to use on me. Kessler still calls me every few months, just to check in, the way he probably promised Ruth he would. As for me, I still have the company. I still have the mug, the real one, world's okayest boss, sitting on my desk, never washed properly, just rinsed and left upside down on a paper towel, the way she did it. I think about Ruth every time I make tea at midnight, and I think, some people protect you loudly, and some people protect you so quietly you don't understand it until years later, standing in a doorway, hearing the door close on someone else for once. If you've ever had to stay silent and wait for the right moment, instead of speaking up right away, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this one moved you, subscribe. There are more like it coming.